Yes. Nobody's first thought when you talk about salsa is supply chain security,
No.
but that's just as fun as the dancing and the tips, right?
Let's see.
when you don't, because so they provided a different set of levels with salsa, and if you opt for salsa level 0, which basically means no protection whatsoever in the supply chain, you will have, I won't necessarily call it fun, but it will be exciting because of all the 0-day exploits that you're exposing yourself to. It will
I
definitely be
love that
better than
this is a
coffee.
level.
Yeah,
Like
I know.
everyone can go out there right now and put on their level zero salsa badge. We've all got that,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Put it on, wear it with pride, add it to your LinkedIn profile. Certified salsa level zero.
Hmm. Yeah, except that when the page that you shared said we'll share it in the description. We'll not screen share. The summary of levels didn't have a zero, just went 1 to 4, and then the detailed explanation introduced the zero. And I was like, that's an interesting. It's
Yeah.
like sort of hinting that you shouldn't be there, but it is possible.
Well, I mean, it, it it makes sense. You have to start from somewhere. Like everyone's journey starts at some point. Like sometimes you might start at salsa level 1. You have the automation. But other times you might start at salsa level 0 because you're just starting out and you don't have any automation whatsoever. And I wouldn't necessarily say salsa level 0 is bad per se, as long as like I'm starting out. I just started up a brand new project. Yeah, I'm basically at salsa level 0. I have nothing in place. Okay, very first thing I do is I'm going to solve it. I'm going to automate. That's the very first thing I want to do. Okay, now I'm moving up, and now I'm addressing that. No, I think the danger is if I'm at salsa level 0 and I'm fine with being at salsa level 0, which
Mm.
basically means I have no automation, I have no checks in place, I have nothing.
And I suppose there's probably a one level below salsa level zero, which is a level called what's salsa, right? Where you didn't even know it existed. So
Yeah,
level zero, you're salsa aware. So that's actually a good first step. So how are we getting from level zero to level one? You mentioned automation.
yeah. Well, why don't we take a step back and let's talk a little bit about what the heck is salsa? We're going to go into
Yeah.
these different levels and everything like that. What I guess my question to you, Steve, I'm going to answer your question with a question. What is salsa?
Yeah. So I suppose we realized a few years back that just kind of making sure via code review that our software is secure left a giant hole in our software security because nobody is publishing software that they wrote entirely themselves. In fact, I would guess that most of the software that I publish these days, there are more lines of code that came from somewhere else than came from me. And so there was suddenly a lot of attention on making things more secure and making sure that the thing, not just that it's secure, but it remains secure. Because if you publish version 1.2 of your software, you want to make sure that when people install version 1.2, it's the same version 1.2 that you published and it hasn't been tampered with. So there's this whole need to make sure the software is secure, make sure that the software that people get is still secure. And there's a few competing acronyms around this, but Salsa is a very popular
Yeah.
pathway to making things secure. That may have boiled it down to too much of a simple version, but hopefully that covers it.
Well, I mean, it's a set of it's a set of guidelines, and I think that's probably the most important thing is making sure that you understand a set of guidelines on that. And so there are different levels to salsa. So we were joking about salsa level 0 being basically you have nothing in place. So there are a couple of terms that get thrown out when we start talking about salsa, primarily provenance and attestation. So provenance is the metadata. It's how the thing was built. So if we want to use the analogy, it's how, think about it. You're baking a cake. How the cake was built. That exact list of instructions on something like that. And then you have the attestation that guarantees that the cake was built following those instructions. So if you could bring it back to your software delivery terminology, it's okay. I have built the thing. I've creating this provenance and I am attesting to that this is the thing that I built. and I'm going to cryptographically sign that this is the thing that I built. And so when I come in and I want to attest to that provenance later, that's what I'm testing. I'm verifying that yes, this is the thing that in fact was built. It hasn't been tampered with, and it hasn't, and it will work. It should work, providing you follow all the appropriate instructions on top of that. And then I think there's a kind of a side-loaded thing in there as well, which is known as an SBOM. Now, I'm sure you've probably heard of SBOM, Steve, but do you want to explain that at all to the audience? Because I have a very simplistic explanation, but I'm kind of curious to see what you have to say.
Yeah, so I mean, funnily enough, the catering examples are great for this, especially as it's salsa, right? So if I was
Yeah,
making a salsa, and I claim it's a vegan salsa, right?
yep,
Cool. Got my market in mind. It's Tony. And I would need to make sure that everyone that I got my ingredients from was supplying me with vegan ingredients. And I would take, they all give me a batch number, and I would take all those batch numbers. I would create a list of ingredients that I've put in, have those batch numbers, have those suppliers listed so I know where everything came from. So that if anyone were to challenge my vegan recipe, I've got the list of things that I use to make it, which helps me prove that it's all vegan. That effectively is my S bomb for my salsa. So uh, that we do it with software. It's quite easy with software because
yeah,
you already have a file that lists all of your dependencies and where they came from. And that's our S bomb, right?
yeah. And the nice thing about it is, like you said, it's super easy to get that. In fact, there are a number of third-party tools that are open source. My personal favorite is Trivy. You just point Trivy at a directory, and it automatically just recursively scans, finds those package lock files or appropriate references, and goes, okay, I'm going to put it all together for you. Here's your SBOM. You can specify the format because they're like anything in the world. There's always going to be competing formats. And so Trivy was like, okay, whatever format you want, we got you covered. And what's even cooler about this whole concept of salsa and provenance and attestation, you can actually attest to your SBOM. So you can create an attestation for your SBOM that you can then go back and say, okay, this hasn't been tampered with either, because I think that's part of it as well. Because you want to make, going back to your analogy of your ingredient list for the vegan, you want to make sure that no one came in 3 months later and just scratched out something and then said, nope, we actually used this ingredient and that, because they found out something wasn't truly vegan on something like that. So you can also do something along those lines. So again, salsa. So when we talk about salsa, what we're referring to is provenance and attestation, but I also want to make sure we address SBOMs as well, because to me, that's all of that combined. That's crucial to your supply chain security. So salsa level one, this is you have the provenance that you're not attesting to it, but you just have the provenance. And that's really it. And you have automation in place to generate that provenance. You have automation to do your deployments, your builds, the whole 9 yards on that. And then we get up to salsa level two, which is, I'm just going to read it off the screen for you. It requires using version control and a hosted build server that generates authenticated provenance. And so really this is kind of that generating that kind of that attestation to kind of prevent that tempering or anything along those lines. What's nice about that is I think a lot of people, they stay at salsa level 2 probably not too long because it's super easy to get up to salsa level 3, which is now you're guaranteeing the auditability of the source and the integrity of the provenance respectively. So this is where you're verifying the attestation. I've attesting to my provenance. My provenance again is basically my build instructions, is how it was built. It was in fact built. This is the artifact that I built, so that's the provenance. It's all the metadata that goes into that, and I'm attesting to that. And then salsa level 3 is I'm verifying that attestation ideally right before we do that deployment.
And this is to make sure that it's all still the same bundle of things that we originally put there, and no one's snuck on and changed it. This is a little bit like, I remember we were all starting to load JavaScript from CDNs,
Yep.
and they added a feature in where you could put a hash in the script attribute that would check that the file you were getting was the one you expected, hadn't been tampered with.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm going to use GitHub's attestation because that's the one I'm most familiar with. So within GitHub Actions, you can generate an attestation, And then as part of the deployment itself, so from Octopus deploy, you can verify that attestation. And what it does, it's interesting you say it uses the hash. So if I point it at, say, a zip file or a jar file or a NuGet package or whatever, it will generate a hash of that file, however it's composed. And then when it verifies the attestation, it's looking up the attestation by that hash in your particular repo. And so if it can't find the attestation for that hash, that likely means it's either has never been generated, which is really odd if it's automated, or most more likely it's been tampered with. And so it's a nice guarantee on top of that. But it's also cryptographically signed, so the attestation hasn't been tampered with either. So it's kind of this: how do you trust someone in a world where everyone is trying to, we can't trust anybody basically on that. So that's
That's the
probably the most interesting thing about this whole concept is that's really what this kind of comes back to is I want to basically I want to be able to trust you, but at the same time I'm really going to verify you. I want to make sure it's we're getting a new roof right now. That's I don't hopefully no one hears the noise. Um, before we got the roofer signed, we're looking at the BBB or the Better Business Bureau for those that don't live in the States, making sure that yes, they've been around for a while. We can look at, yep, they've been around for a while. They don't have any complaints. They have a really high rating. You look at Google reviews, they have a really high rating. So like you make sure like you do your due diligence on this. And this is the same thing when it comes to I want to download and run this software, especially if it's COTS software. If I'm just downloading, say, Octopus or I want to download Argo or something like that. I want to make sure that it is the thing that I want to download and it hasn't been tampered with and no one's injected or anything like that.
So the mechanism for this, during your build process, you create the metadata and you do all of this signing that kind of gives you that way of proving the version.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're actually doing your deployment, do you effectively generate a hash there and call back to ask if it exists? Is that how that works?
Yep, that's exactly how that works. So that's how how you can configure Octopus deploy is I want to generate the hash of either the artifact, the build artifact that I want to deploy, be it the zip, the jar, the war, whatever the case may be. Or if you want to go against your a container, for example, it's going to use the digest hash, and it's going to take that and it's just going to make sure that it hasn't been tampered with, or you've up. Typically, especially if you're using a tag like latest, which you should never do, but if you're using a tag like latest, that tag might have changed, and so this also is a good way to catch that because like I expect this hash, but in reality I'm getting this hash. Okay, something's not quite right here. So ideally you're doing this right before you do a deployment, and it's to me it's part of that pre-deployment step. So as part of my deployment process itself, step one, I pull things out of the key vault. Step two, verify everything. Verify the attestation, verify my build artifacts, verify the attestation of the SBOM, those types of things before I even get into the point where I'm actually doing a deployment. Even before I even start building Delta scripts about my database, because I don't know if that could cause problems as well. So I'm verifying all of this stuff right at the very beginning and making sure that yes, everything is good to go for my deployment. And if it's not, I stop it and I go, nope, we're not allowed to proceed whatsoever.
So that's level three. We're now
Yeah.
fully automated, creating and checking this information. That must be the last level, right? Because now it's all fully automated.
No, so there's level 4, which requires two-person review of all changes and a hermetic reproducible build process. So the two-person review is think of it like your pull request. I mean, that's really a super easy way to do that. And you can set up rules where, the person who is submitting the pull request can't be the person who's reviewing the pull request. Unless you're me, who's working on a simple project internally, and you're like, whatever, I'm corrupt, I don't care. But for every other person, that's the easiest way to do that. And then the hermetic reproducible build process is basically your build process is almost defined as code. So GitHub Actions is a really good example. It's defined as code. I can reproduce it. I could take the exact same steps from, that's been provided, and I can run it locally, and I get the exact same result. And so that, I think that's also as equally as important. So I don't think getting to salsa level 4 is a huge stretch, but again, it takes a series of steps to get to that particular point in time.
It feels like level 4 is most likely to be the part, like the segregation of duties and two-person review. A lot of folks are already doing that one, so that's probably not a huge leap.
Hmm.
Um, the hermetic reproducible build process, which is a wonderful phrase that none of us will forget. What do we need to do to actually make that happen?
That's a really good question. I think it also depends on your tool, your build server as well. But basically, making sure you have consistent build instructions for both locally as well as when you are running on a build server. That's, I think, the most important thing. So it's always super easy to get those, rerun the exact same instructions. So they should be stored in version control. I think that's honestly that's probably the very important first step, and then you can have the debate of what should go into that version control, what level of detail, or what level should the build server be responsible for. So if you use GitHub Actions as an example, you're referencing certain steps. So for example, go back to Trivy. There's a Trivy GitHub action. I'm referencing that versus the Trivia CLI, that type of stuff. You can have a reasonable debate between those, but I think storing it in version control is the absolute first step.
And I suppose you have to make sure a lot of technology already does this, where it creates a lock file so that a dependency doesn't change if you were to run that same build twice,
Yeah,
and that you're using the same compiler. Or if you're really scared, you're running the same two compilers to compare the results to make sure that the compiler hasn't been compromised, right?
yeah. Well, and hopefully a lot of that stuff you're running on ideally containers. Um, Because you come back to the compiler, that's how you can guarantee, yes, this is the exact same way, because I'm using literally the exact same version for both of those. But not every application, not everything can be built using containers, like this kind of like inception style thing, on something along those lines. And I think what we also have to come back to is the whole concept of this is that supply chain security, which is we want to verify the thing that's about to be deployed. And this also comes back to salsa isn't just one of those things like, yeah, that sounds really interesting. It comes back to things like SOX and Dodd-Frank and all of these other industry regulations, because if you look at the salsa requirements and these different levels, and you compare it with SOX requirements or Dodd-Frank requirements, when you compare it in the world of software delivery, there's a lot of overlap. And so if you're at salsa level 4, chances are you already are compliant with all of these other ones. Maybe there's a few tweaks you got to make to be SOX compliant, but you've come a tremendous way. Very similar internally for us when we went, I think it was ISO 27001. When we got that certification, going from that to SOC Type 2, yeah, it was extra work, but we were really close. Like we got a lot done just by doing the ISO 27001. Same exact thing. By doing salsa and going up to like level 3, level 4, I'm going to be compliant with a lot of these other regulations. Maybe not exactly, but I have a lot of overlap and I don't have to work as hard to get to that point.
Yeah, and this was one of the things we found in our compliance through continuous delivery report. Um, the people who are already satisfying some form of regulation actually don't find it too difficult when new regulation comes through because there's a
Yep.
big Venn diagram of all the regulations your company has to adhere to, and there's a huge amount of overlap. There's very little, once you've got two or three regulations, there's very little new being added. So it's only a small uplift each time. So this is a great way of being ahead of the curve in a way. And like introducing this, like the automation part of this and making this part of your build process and part of your deployment process doesn't take too long, right? This isn't a 6 month project.
No. What was interesting about this whole exercise, because what triggered a lot of this stuff was actually a webinar I did with GitHub and their field CTO, and we started talking about supply chain security for FSIs, and that's kind of got me down to this path, which was I only had to add a few steps into my build process itself, and I'm able to run those steps oftentimes in parallel with other steps. So, for example, when I want to generate my SBOM, I'm doing it at the exact same time that I'm running my unit test. So I didn't even get a time hit or penalty whatsoever, which was I think was super crucial. Same thing with when I'm running like trivia scans for any known vulnerabilities or anything like that. Oftentimes I'm doing that at the same time I'm doing something else in the deployment pipeline. So oftentimes it's just an augmentation of what we already have. And I'm also glad that you brought up how hard is it to to add into your process, because I think this is also really where Platform Hub and what we're working on in Platform Hub with process templates and policies can really help out with this, because I can create a set of process templates, maybe one for specifically for containers, another one, for jar, war, those types of packages. And I have those templates that I can then inject very easily into my deployment process with a couple parameters. I kind of get this already. And so in my particular case, I already had a lot of the information. I already had a GitHub PAT that I needed for my deployment and my build and everything like that. I already had build information. I mean, really all I had to add was an SBOM, and that was just a package. And that really wasn't a big leap. Honestly, it took me probably 20 minutes to get everything modified. Um, what's even more powerful with process templates is back to your point about regulations if they change, or I want to add an additional layer of compliance. Well, with process templates, I can just add that into my existing template, an additional step or an additional script I want to run. And then I can push that out to everybody, and everyone can start doing that. And then with our policy engine, what we provide is the capability where we can also check the version of the process template. So we can say, in order for this deployment to go out, not only do you have to use this particular step, but it has to be greater than or equal to this particular version that has the additional steps. And we can start out with warning you for say 30 days. They can set up the policy that way and then say, okay, you've been warned for 30 days, you need to upgrade. Now we're going to start blocking you. And so then we can actually block deployments that aren't compliant. And you can do that all the way down to your dev level. So you can start getting that feedback faster, like, okay, we really need to start fixing this. We're not waiting until we go to production, that type of stuff. So really the idea being is that we can get this level of compliance with ideally a low amount of friction using Platform Hub at a scale that we probably haven't seen before, because, it can be complex, but you can, I think, offload some of that complexity on your platform engineers, and they're the ones that really dive in and understand it, and they can just educate their users.
Yeah, I like this story because it's not a terribly difficult task to do.
No.
Um, so it's not going to cost people loads to do salsa compliance, but they can do it in a way that means that you don't have every developer team having to create their own path for
Yep.
this. You can do it once, and not only can you then make sure these upgrades happen, but the upgrade, if you're using Platform Hub, the upgrade isn't having to get your template file updated in 100 different places. You update it once centrally, and the only effort that might be required is if you've changed the parameters for those consuming it.
Yeah.
If you need an additional parameter, they would need to just pass that. But they don't have to go through and do like a big diff on their template versus the central template and working out how to bring the changes in. So yeah, this could be a super light lift for
Yep.
an organization, but it's going to massively improve their security.
And not only that, talking a little bit about updates. So my very original process template, all it did was I took an SBOM and I attached it as a deployment artifact to the deployment itself. So this is the SBOM that was used to deploy this thing. And then I just ran GitHub attestation verify on each of my artifacts. And that's literally all it did, which is fine. And that worked out really well. And then I started thinking, is there a way I can iterate on this to make it a little bit better, a little bit more secure? And so in that same exact process template, after I extract the SBOM and I'm right after I attach it as a deployment artifact, I take that SBOM and I run Trivy on it. And I say, hey, are there any known new vulnerabilities that I need to know about with my reference packages? So imagine for a second that I built my code using package version 2.0. I just upgraded to that brand new package on Monday. I ran through all the verification on Tuesday and Wednesday, but on Wednesday night, a known CVE was issued, like a critical CVE, and it's also fixed pretty rapidly. So now version 2.0.1 is what I really need to run. I don't know that because, I mean, very few people stay that up to date. But then I run my trivia scan on Thursday before I do my deployment to production. It catches that. It goes, hey, you're about ready to release a new version of code, and it has a known critical vulnerability. Okay, well, I'm glad I know about that. And then I can make the decision of either I want to proceed, I go, yep, I'm going to accept this risk, I'm going to fix it really rapidly, or no, I'm not going to do that whatsoever. Um, and then I did also the same thing. I ran Trivy on the Docker containers I was about ready to deploy, just again looking for any known new vulnerabilities in the case of anything along those lines. And I didn't have to change any parameters. I didn't have to do anything fancy. It was just an augmentation to my existing process template. Pushed it out, and all my projects that were using that process template just got all that for free. I didn't have to change a single thing, which was fantastic in my mind. You know, like from a consumer point of view, I just got this additional layer of security for a minimal amount of effort.
I love that, and I love to think of that as it rolls out to some of the people we've been talking to recently. They've got platform groups,
Mm-hmm.
and they're dealing with not even hundreds of developers; it's hundreds of teams.
Yeah,
So instead of now having to coordinate hundreds or of teams all updating something, if you haven't broken like that interface or that contract, it can just roll out and they all get that uplift with no effort at all.
yeah, and it's that to me is just it really spoke to the power when I started iterating on this process template. What I love also is the policies is being able to enforce it and say, okay, you know, this was a breaking change. We acknowledge that it was a breaking change. We're going to give you a, we're going to warn you on this. We're going to give you some time to update. And then, okay, you didn't, we gave you the warning. We told you what was going to happen. And then we just made the decision. All right, now we're going to start blocking deployments. And again, it goes back to that scalability. So now you can do that at scale. And now you can really start enforcing this. Yeah, you're probably not going to be the most important, you're probably going to be the most popular person when you start blocking deployments. But you know what? Them's the rules. It's better to be, yeah, like we gave you all the appropriate notification, gave you the appropriate ways to upgrade. And with Octopus, it's not like we're asking you to, you know, you have to do a whole bunch of other things. It was either add the process template, fill out the parameters, or go into your deployment process and click the update button. That was it. We weren't like asking you to like completely revamp your entire pipeline.
Yeah, fewer meetings, fewer spreadsheets, fewer Gantt charts. It can all be handled inside of the tools, which is how things should be.
Yeah,
So I love that. We're getting
awesome.
close to time. So I
Yeah.
do have one final question that I'd like to
Okay.
ask, and this is pretty serious.
Is this
So
another existential question that it's going to make me
yeah, think hard
not going to,
about
I'm not going
this.
to be able to sleep tonight again?
Yeah, yeah, for weeks you'll be wishing you'd picked a different answer once you think about it even more. But which decade gave us the best music?
Oh, that's easy for me. 1990s without question. And
Wow, straight in there.
I have a working theory around why that is. Do you want to hear my working theory?
Yes, I'll take it.
Okay. So, if you think back to the like the 50s and 60s, record labels, yeah, they were fairly big, but they weren't massive. They didn't have truckloads of money. And that's primarily because you got to think about the means in which music was distributed. It's either radio or record, and that was really it. And then the 70s hit, and you got the 8-track. And so a lot of people, they rebought their album. And so they could start signing some interesting groups. You start getting some interesting music. And then the cassette came out in the 80s, and that's when you got starts getting some really interesting music because the record companies started getting more and more money because people were rebuying a lot of the same albums. You know, myself, I have Abbey Road on uh, vinyl as well as CD as well as digital, and I've bought all three of those. You know, so people were doing that, and so you had this kind of influx of money, and so you can start taking more and more risks. And I think that peaked in the 90s because you added not only cassettes, but now you also have CDs. And CDs, you could say, well, this is a completely new format. We're going to start charging a little bit more because, quote unquote, the quality is better. And oftentimes it was $15 for a CD and it was $9 or $10 for a cassette. And it was basically the exact same music. Yeah, the quality was slightly better. Um, And so record companies, they were flush with cash, and so they felt confident in taking risks. Like, yeah, I feel fine giving this artist $100,000 because ultimately it's not a big risk to my bottom line. So this is why when I listen to, I have Sirius XM, when I listen to Lithium, I could hear Stone Temple Pilots, I can hear Dave Matthews Band, I can hear Nirvana, I can hear Red Hot Chili Peppers. I think sometimes they'll throw in like, I don't think they ever throw in Jewel, but you can hear Jewel. You can hear, if you go to like 90s, you can hear gangster rap, you can hear, you know, popular rap, R&B, and so there's this wide range of music that's out there because companies were willing to take a risk, and it was kind of like that early stages, and so there were a lot of like the cream really floated to the top with that. Um, so that's my working theory behind it.
I love that theory. And you're missing an Abbey Road cartridge from your collection. I don't know if you remember way back, they used to do little cartridges. I think they were called 8-track cartridges of
Yeah, yeah,
music.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't
Um,
have an 8-track player.
yeah, it's interesting. Obviously now we don't pay artists any money because
Yeah,
like, you know, that's the new model for music. I thought about this and I kind of landed on the 90s as well, but I haven't heard of any of the bands you mentioned. Like I've never heard
oh,
of Nirvana or Red Hot Chili Peppers because we had this thing called Britpop happening over here with bands like Suede and Echo Belly and Sleeper and Elastica and there's a band called Oasis that some people have heard of that were
yeah.
kind of around at the time. So 90s was pretty cool. And there is actually like a 90s revival happening right now with bands like Rocket bringing back that kind of that sound. So yeah, it's a pretty good choice. Tony,
It was
what
the
decade?
only thing the only thing I wanted to throw out there is that it's so distinct. And I think because you said, we don't really pay artists money today. That's why so much of the music really sounds the same to me, like any of the new popular hits. It's, everyone finds this kind of like hook. Oh, and everyone's like, I'm gonna go right to that hook. So a really good example now is that a lot of popular female artists, it's more of a breathy song. They kind of like, it's yeah, they kind of add a little bit of breath, and like you could see like everyone wanted to sound the same. It's like homogeny was so fast now.
I'm gonna have to make it a hat trick for the 90s. It's
There you
like, and
go.
I think it's mainly nostalgia on my part, sort of growing up as a kid in the 90s. But I would probably classify to say anything 90s and backwards. To Bob's point, I think it's a lot of music has just been destroyed, and
Hmm.
I know we've talked about AI and sort of stuff, but it does just sound, and we've had tons of these like music. It's probably like America's Got Talent in the States, but they're similar here, and they're just like they're trying to find the sort of cookie cutter that works for. They're going to sell them. It's not the best singer. It's like you look good, you sound
Yeah,
this way, you'll sell loads. It's like what about the guy with the guitar? He sounds great. No, not him.
yeah.
So yeah, kind of thing.
Do
So
you
it's they've kind of yeah.
do you think that in the current music industry today, bands like NWA and Rage Against the Machine would be popular, or would even like? Do you think like the music industry would even sign them?
It's an interesting question. I think I would split it to say I think it's still possible that a band like that could become really popular. But would they become successful? And
Mm.
that's tough.
That's a
I
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
Would they go mainstream?
yeah.
Probably not. Yeah.
Well, I also think part of it's also, if you think back to the 90s and as well as the 80s, a lot of the things that caused NWA, and we're kind of getting more socioeconomic, but a lot of the kind of the rage that was pent up because
Yeah.
the we're in the information age, and so when something happens across the world, we hear about it almost instantaneously,
Yeah.
and it's so a lot of the problems that caused NWA and Rage Against the Machine to want to just basically scream out and create this type of music wasn't being reported on. People didn't know that this was happening unless you were in those areas or unless you saw that firsthand. But now with the information age, we can kind of see a lot of that stuff. So that's the other reason why I don't. They'd be like, yeah, we kind of know about this. But then like I think back in the day when they first came out, it was like, whoa, what's going on over here? Like, this is some wild stuff, you know.
Mm. I think we're ready for it. I think we're ready for another music revolution. We've
I
done
think
10,
so.
20 years of
Yeah.
sameness. Yeah. So I'm on
I'm
for that.
very curious I'm very curious to see what music comes out in the next 2 3 years, to say the least.
Mm.
That kind of speaks to the world. So
Yeah, very
Yeah,
true.
I think we should start our own revival band with cigar box guitars and spoons.
yeah,
Like that's been out of the limelight for too long. Let's bring it back.
three
Yeah.
three old men talking about the good old days.
Yeah. I genuinely did it now. It was like an Irish music gig. It's probably about 2 years ago, and there's an Irish band called the Dubliners, and there's like tribute acts to them and stuff. And a
Yeah.
person from the audience genuinely got up with a set of spoons that he had and tried to get on the stage. So it happens. There are people out there. Spoons are a
Yeah.
thing.
It's now. The time is now for the spoon
Yeah.
revival.
Yeah. Yeah.
If only
Yeah.
I'd
This
got his
was.
name.
Yeah. Is are the Pogues, were they an Irish band?
They were. Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
based in London a lot, but they were Irish, yeah.
Okay. The only reason I know about them is because of the TV show The Wire, because they played anytime a
Yes,
cop retired, they play that song. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's right.
I'm like, it's like I like this music. I'm gonna
Yeah.
buy their album.
Pogues
I'm
are
still the
Pogues are amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm still that old man that I don't care if it's available on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever. I'm going
Yeah.
and I'm buying the album. I mean, yeah, it's on MP3, but I'm buying that
Yeah.
album and I'm downloading it on my phone. Like I'm that old man.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
you're not taking away my music.
Yeah.
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 I had that recently where one of my favorite albums, the album was called For Every Heart There Is a Knife. Absolutely superb album.
Yeah.
Uh, it disappeared from streaming. It just
Uh,
winked out of existence one day. And now I can't listen to it because that was the only place I had it. So I've actually bounced back. I'm buying stuff on Bandcamp now, going and buying
Oh, yeah.
directly from bands.
Oh,
So
there you go. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Well,
I my entire NAS backup strategy is to save two things: all the music I've purchased, because I got a lot, and all the photos I've taken, and that's really it. That's the entirety of my entire. That's the whole reason why I have a 16 terabyte NAS, and I back up to back